Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast, and thank you for joining me for folks' favorite Fandom Friday. Now, every Friday, I get the chance to visit with somebody from the wider world of the Tolkien fandom. Writers and musicians, artists, scholars, craftsmen, content creators, and a whole lot more. Today, I am very happy to be joined by yet another luminary in the star-filled sky of the Tolkien fandom. He is a journalist, speaker, teacher, and writer. He's won the Mythopoeic Award for Scholarship and the Tolkien Society's Outstanding Contribution Award. He's the author of The Worlds of J.R.R. Tolkien, The Places That Inspired Middle-earth, Tolkien at Exeter College, and the book that you've hopefully been enjoying a lot on Tolkien Tuesdays the last 8 weeks, Tolkien and the Great War. And despite his better judgment, he's also been a guest on the Prancing Pony podcast numerous times. Folks, please welcome John Garth.
Hello, Alan. Thank you for having me.
Hello, John. It is a pleasure to have you here. And I was going to say, you've been on the PPP so many times, it feels natural to have you here. So thank you.
That's great.
It may be hard for folks to believe, quite possibly including yourself, but Tolkien and the Great War is now 20 years old, having first been published back in 2003. Take us back a little bit to that time. What was the impetus for the book in the first place? And then I'd love to know what one or two of the biggest surprises were that you came across in researching and writing that must-read book.
There's quite a lot of different impetuses, but simply put, first of all, Elvish.
Okay.
I was trying to write the world's best Elvish dictionary, bearing in mind that Tolkien kept tinkering with it. So I wanted to work out the dates in which he wrote various texts. So I started out with the Book of Lost Tales, which was written during the First World War.
Yeah.
And that led me to want to know more about where Tolkien was, and see if I could work out more about the dates for his writings. Meanwhile, I, like I think many people in Britain, was haunted by the First World War. To Britons, it has much more meaning, I think, than it does to Americans, for example. It might be equated as a kind of myth, meaning not something that's untrue, but something that has kind of cultural resonance.
Yeah.
With, I don't know, Omaha Beach, say, or with Vietnam, sort of opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of suffering or heroism, you know?
Yeah.
So I was really fascinated by the fact that Tolkien came out of the First World War, the war of disenchantment, writing about enchantment. And I realized that I wanted to know why. No one had told me why, so I needed to find out. I wanted to write about it. I started writing a fanzine article, and before I knew where I was, I'd written 44,000 words.
44,000 words. That's almost half a almost half a book.
Right. That's it. Yeah.
Wow.
So in terms of surprise findings, the great breakthrough really was two great breakthroughs. One, locating the family of Rob Gilson, Tolkien's friend in the TCBS, Tea Club and Brovian Society, who, with amazing trust and generosity, lent me a tin full of Rob's letters from school, college, army training, and the trenches, right up till his death in the Battle of the Somme.
Wow!
And these mention Tolkien a few times. They really fill out the picture of their group of friends, their wider group of friends. I realized that there were more people in the TCBS than the four at the center of it.
Yeah.
And he just gave me a great insight in what it was like to be a soldier, a volunteer soldier at that time of Tolkien's kind of background. So that was great. The other great breakthrough was simply being allowed by the Tolkien estate to look at the letters between the TCBS members, including Tolkien, which were at the Bodleian Library in Oxford. And that was just intensely moving. And it had taken some time coming. So when it arrived, I felt as though it gives the book its real lifeblood, its pulse, its beating heart.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. I mean, I think that's what makes the story that you tell so powerful and so moving, is it because so much of it is in their own words, and even the part that isn't is informed deeply by those words, by their personal experiences. And yeah, wow, I can't even imagine either of those. That must have been quite the moment in both cases
I
to
was
be. Yeah.
I was at the British Library last week, and I remembered sitting in the reading room,
Mhm.
finishing the last chapter of Tolkien
Oh,
and the Great War, and I was writing about what happened to the friendship between Tolkien and Christopher Wiseman and how they drifted apart from being such best buddies that they called themselves the Great Twin
yeah,
Brethren
yeah.
in their youth. And I can remember having to sort of try to hold back the tears so I
Mm.
wouldn't sob in the middle of this silent reading room, you know.
Not to mention with, I'm
Um,
sure, all the papers in front of you that you're trying to work on, as well, tears on the manuscript like we have with Tolkien
well, that's
himself.
so that sometimes really, yeah, intensely moving, and you're in a public place. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine that. The book is deeply moving. I really hope a lot of folks have picked it up. I mean, I know I barely only scratched the surface, so hopefully people will be intrigued. But of course, you've written a couple of significant books since then. Tolkien at Exeter College is granted more like a half a book, but it is incredibly rich in detail, and it has that same very personal, very close-up feel that The Great War does. But then, of course, there's the gorgeous volume, The Worlds of J.R.R. Tolkien. But here's the thing. I've talked to you about those before on the Prancing Pony podcast. And folks, if you want to know more about that, I can get you the episode numbers. But John, what I want to ask you about is the book you're currently working on, Tolkien's Mirror. How is that coming along?
It's coming on pretty nicely. Writing a book like this is not a case of starting at the beginning and working your
No,
way through.
no.
It's more like a huge jigsaw,
Yeah.
and in this case, a jigsaw where I didn't even know what the final picture ought to be like. Um, Essentially, it's a further study of the impact of the First World War on Tolkien's imagination, but going forward right up till the end of the Second World War.
Mm.
So it's kind of like, and this, maybe a subtitle, I don't know, but it's Tolkien from the Somme to the bomb. You
Oh,
know,
wow. Yeah.
so because I will be talking about the impact of the atomic bomb on his imagination,
Yeah.
not as an inspiration for The Ring,
No.
because I believe him when he says it cannot have been that,
Yeah.
but for other things which are, in many ways far more interesting. So yeah, it's now, I think, tipped the balance between being a book that's, struggling to get to the halfway mark.
Mhm.
Now it's falling together, and I'm hoping to find a publisher for it in the next few months.
Well, good. So it's something that we might expect in a few years?
Oh, certainly, probably not next year, but I would
No.
hope the year
2,
after.
3 years
Yeah.
tops? Okay. Well, I'm surprised you don't already have a publisher for it. I got to be honest. That when you said you're trying to find a publisher, I'm a little surprised. I mean, I can imagine people are going to be knocking down your door, frankly. But
Well,
hopefully that
there's a
won't be
reason
long.
for this. One is that it's a long time since Tolkien and the Great War. I'm in a
Sure.
much better position now that the Worlds of J.R.R. Tolkien is published.
Hmm.
I'm a live author, no longer dormant.
Right.
And also at this time, I wanted to do it with a literary agent,
Oh, okay. Yeah,
so that it makes more financial sense.
it
The
does.
past two books I've done on my own,
Yeah.
and I now have an agent.
Good.
So yeah, I'm
Excellent.
going
I'm
to do
glad
it
to
right.
hear that. Well, I mean, that sort of touches on my next question. I mean, let's be honest. One of the challenges of being a writer, especially in a relatively niche field like Tolkien, and I know we all think, how is that niche? But really, in terms of what we do, I say we, I mean content creators, people in general, is sort of niche in the general field. What you do is even more specialized. And so as a result, it doesn't really pay well enough to make a living. So you're having to balance freelance editing and other writing alongside the progress you make on your Tolkien work. How do you manage that balance beside getting a literary agent?
Right. Well, even getting a literary agent isn't going to make me rich.
No.
Most writers have to balance writing with something else.
Yeah.
It's just a fact of life. The funds in it just are not what people might imagine they are, unless you're talking about mega sellers,
Well, sure.
Stephen King or J.K. Rowling or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, How do I balance it? So the equation is I have to work to give myself free time
Mhm.
in order to do my research and writing. Um, the more lucrative the work I get, the better it goes, and I'm constantly working on trying to improve that.
Sure.
One of the ways that I manage to square the circle is by getting Tolkien related work.
Oh, okay.
So this week I'm in Oxford talking to the Finnish public broadcasting company YLE
Mhm.
about the influence of Finnish on Tolkien's imagination.
Ah,
Um, and
that should be
I'm
rich.
meanwhile
There's a lot to go there, isn't there?
there's a hell of a lot. Yeah, it's really vital. I think they
Yeah.
were quite surprised when I told them just how vital. Um, and I've worked on other people's. I've helped assisted other Tolkien researchers and
Mhm.
writers with copy editing books, indexing books, things like that. But most of the time, it's a tug of war
Yeah.
between freelancing on things that are nothing to do with Tolkien and having time to research and write.
Okay. Well, one of the things that has helped keep my podcasting and writing alive is crowdfunding, in my case, through Patreon. You've started a similar effort over on Steady. I know I've told folks for the last several weeks, I'm proud to back you there. Now's your chance to tell my listeners why they should do the same, how that helps you get these books done, how this helps you square that circle, as you call it.
Well, simply put, it liberates me from the chains of having to earn freelance work that's not to do with Tolkien.
That's fair.
So what I'm aiming for is I'm looking at the income in terms of the number of days per month that it allows me to focus on writing and research.
Mm.
Um, I launched it back in May because I'd already spent an entire month working on Tolkien's Mirror,
Yeah.
um, earning nothing
Oh,
whatsoever, and
right.
that's
Yeah.
a big ask for my family, for example.
Hmm.
You know, this is I have responsibilities, right?
Yeah.
Um, Now I feel that I can take some time. I'm starting to feel that I can take some time to actually enrich my work, do it with a proper focus without feeling totally torn, and that there's a progress forward in this direction where I can improve. I can improve what I offer to my steady supporters,
Hmm.
which I'm looking at right now. And thanks for your advice for this, Alan.
Oh, I'm happy to
Um,
have given it. Yeah.
and yeah, the more the merrier. From a point of view of people who are interested in Tolkien and in my particular work on Tolkien, um, it literally does help me bring the day nearer when I can provide you with a new book to read. And every bit of work that I do on Tolkien enriches what I can say about him too.
That makes sense. I mean, the more supporters you have, the more revenue you're bringing in through Steady, the more time you can devote to the book because you're not having to do those freelance projects that have nothing to do with Middle Earth at all, nothing to do with Tolkien. And that gives you more time. So now all of a sudden we get the book, like you said, possibly in the next year or maybe a little longer than that, but certainly not 5 years down the line like it might be if you were having to do this only in your spare time from revenue producing work.
Right. I
Yeah.
mean, and it's mostly about time. So there are
Yeah.
some expenses involved. I mean, I have
Well,
to
sure.
provide my own library because I'm not an academic. I don't have a university library
Yeah.
nearby. Um, I go to Oxford sometimes to do research in the Bodleian Library. In fact, I'm going tomorrow,
Oh, yeah.
um, and I can do that pretty cheaply. Thanks to friends who put me up in Oxford very kindly. Um, so mostly, yeah, it's just time.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. I having written a book that required nowhere near as much effort, nowhere near the kind of research, and nowhere near the amount of talent, I can tell you just from writing that how valuable time is. And so, folks, if you want to read Tolkien's Mirror, and I know I do, get on board and definitely head on over to John's Steady, which we'll have in the captions for the show. Okay. Well, folks, that is it for today's Fandom Friday. But come back next time for Fandom Friday to meet another of your fellow Tolkien fans and maybe even learn what niches of the community you might be interested in exploring. Now, if you're interested in joining me here for a future Fandom Friday, let me know by emailing barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can support this show and get an ad-free feed, a monthly hangout with me, a bonus weekly episode, and a lot more. Join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times as we wrap up this week and this season with Silmarillion Saturday. If you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Please follow or subscribe in your podcast apps and follow @Tolkien Times on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.